Boom. And we are live. Welcome everyone to another fun episode of LunarCRUSH Live. We got some special guests here today that we're super excited to be talking with. We're all about the community here at LunarCRUSH, and this project has a great community, and it's been fun to watch it grow over the years. And you guys were even in the space, before even I was even involved. I know John was around, but I'm a newbie compared to you guys. But I want to welcome Josiah, Jared, and Noah from DigiByte Ecosphere, working on projects, working on community. Then you got John and myself here as always to create some commentary. So I did want to start off, just everyone go around and just we'll start with Josiah, Jared, Noah. Tell us where you are in the world today and what's happening there.
Yeah, so my name is Josiah. I am in New Zealand, land of the long white cloud, land of Lord of the Rings, hobbits, and a prime minister that's apparently the envy of the world at the moment. So there you go.
Epic.
Yeah, my name's Jared Tate. I am actually up in the mountains of Idaho right now. So I'm mainly based in Austin, Texas, but given the pandemic situation, it's good to be up here visiting family.
Very cool.
Nice.
My name is Noah. I'm from Florida, at least for the last couple of years. I feel like, you guys remember Escape from New York with Kurt Russell all those years ago?
Yeah.
I escaped. So, albeit they make homes with concrete down here, so that makes the houses very complicated, as I mentioned pre-recording. So things are good, and it's there is no red sky unless it's a sunrise down here in Florida. So I feel for what's going out there in Cali. That is crazy. But it's good to be here. Welcome everyone. I love talking.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, no, it's not quite like out here in Southern California where, man, it's really eerie. I don't know if you guys saw some of those images from San Francisco. It's probably a little bit worse than it is down here in Southern California. But I mean, I've got some friends that live up there, and I called them. I was like, is it actually is it like the pictures? He's like, identical. He's like, it is a weird, eerie thing up there. So, but I think I'm pretty jealous of Josiah in New Zealand, man. I feel like that I want to be on some mountain out there somewhere, just like filming Lord of the Rings. So very cool. Well, let's do one more little roundtable because this is our first live stream with 5 people on it. So we're going to try to keep it organized. But Josiah, if you can tell us just a little bit about your role in the DigiByte community and what you're working on right now and what you're excited about, and then we'll kind of go around a little bit for another little roundtable.
So the joys of being a permissionless blockchain. So a lot of people will talk about being decentralized, and we can obviously debate the metrics around other projects being decentralized or not, but we are a permissionless project, which basically means that there is no central place of authority, nobody pulling the strings, nobody who has a majority share or anything like that. And as such, you can get anybody, such as myself, just waking up one morning and deciding, you know what, I'm going to participate, and I'm going to be an advocate for it, and I'm going to help do everything that I can to try and push the entire project forward. So I started off doing a lot of community-based education and things like that, helping out a lot with mining, documentation. I now run a few servers and things like that. We've got the DGBWiki.com server, which has a absolute plethora of information there. And I'm also helping out with a lot of things kind of behind the scenes in terms of getting the likes of Schnorr signatures, ProgPow, RandomX, and the likes all implemented, I suppose, into the next version. Very cool. Very cool.
Jared, what do you do?
It's a good question. I ask myself every morning.
I do the same.
That's too deep, man. We haven't had enough beers for that. Oh man.
Well, about this time, about 7 years ago, I came up with an idea I thought that would improve the speed and efficiency and security of Bitcoin. Started working on a prototype, and that culminated in the launch of DigiByte on January 10th, 2014. And since then, there's never been a dull moment. And over the last 7 years, I've definitely worn multiple hats. But the great part is I like to consider myself the chief applause officer now, because I get to sit back and cheer everybody on and see all the awesome work that community members are stepping up and doing around the world.
That's really cool, man.
Yeah. Well, good stuff.
I got a question. I got a question. What was it you said to improve upon Bitcoin? Was there a specific moment, or was there an event that drove that thinking?
Oh yeah,
decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, at the time, I was mining with my desktop computers. I had started kind of a GPU farm. And, you know, the first bunch of Avalons hit, and I think it was in April of 2013, and I did the math. Up until that point, I was generating about, like January of 2013, I was getting about a Bitcoin a day. If I remember right, from my mining, which, you know, back then it was like $5, right? So, you know, I thought it was cool. Well, you know, within a week of these Avalon miners hitting, it basically, I calculated it would take me about 6,000 days to get a Bitcoin from the same mining hardware. That's how fast the ASICs changed the game. But then the biggest thing is for those of you that don't know what Mt. Gox was, it was the first, second, and third crisis in crypto. There was multiple times that Mt. Gox crashed. And I was trying to withdraw. I think I had several hundred Bitcoins at the time. And the transactions were so slow, you know. And by the time I tried to make some transactions, I was like, there's got to be a better way. Like, why can't this be instantaneous? This is a groundbreaking new technology. Why do we have to wait an hour for 6 confirmations? So that's what led me to dive into the core source code. And I'm like, yes, there's got to be a way to make this faster.
Great.
Awesome.
Well, you hit on a nice point, that faster. As Josiah said, there's a plethora of aspects to DigiByte that make it special and unique. But that faster, I would go, this is besides given my brief introduction, of course, I would go as far as saying that the predictable, dependable, consistent block timing is one of the most special properties. That is a critical requirement for business. You can't bank on something that is not predictable. When you send in $1 billion transaction across the planet, yeah, you'll get it maybe in 30 minutes, maybe in an hour, maybe, you know. But when you could say within a very specific time frame with relative certainty of when the transaction will be completed and verifiable, that is overwhelmingly significant and deviant as compared to Bitcoin. I guess deviant has a negative connotation, so deviant in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to further extrapolate on that story about speed and how it's critical, I ended up losing basically half of my BTC during the second Gox crash because of the delay in speed. So that was probably, if there was a single motivating factor to go out there and research something better, that would probably be it. You know, they say necessity is the mother of invention.
That's right.
So we can thank Gox for all of this.
Yeah, basically. But by the time the third one happened, I was nowhere to be found. Like I stopped using it several months prior.
Yeah.
We've still got some friends that are trying to get their coins back from the Mt. Gox issue, the whole episode.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Which, by the way, now includes every fork that's occurred to Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah.
Since
then, for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't even thought about that, but I guess I wrote that all off years ago.
Yep.
So you guys are obviously you've been in it for a while. You're all very technical, and you've probably had to explain, you know, DigiByte and cryptocurrency to thousands of people that have asked you. But the question is, the question is, or the statement is, explain cryptocurrency in general to someone, and I'll let anyone take this who wants to take it first. But just how do you explain cryptocurrency to someone that has never even heard of it? They don't know Bitcoin. They don't know anything. How do you explain that? Because John and I were talking about it. It was like, the deeper you get into the space, like for some reason, the harder it becomes to actually like explain this sometimes. Because you're like, you know, you just start, you know, firing off things that you know, you got to start foundational. So who wants to grab that one?
Well, you know, one of the things that I've started with over the years is, as soon as somebody asks me, well, why should I look into Bitcoin? Why should I care? Why should I care about cryptocurrencies? I always follow it up with a question. Do you know how the banking system in your bank actually works? Mm-hmm. And then we dive into that first, because if you can explain to them how the fractional reserve element of the traditional fiat system works, without that understanding, that aha moment doesn't really seem to come with a cryptocurrency and the decentralized mediation of it all. But if somebody else wants to jump in, I have a few other spiels that I've attempted over the years.
had a couple. So it comes up a lot, particularly because of the technical complexity of crypto. And I often try and avoid it. And of late, I talk much about monetary properties, trying to obviously compare to the pure inflationary nature of fiat. So I talk about the depreciation and the devaluation of the dollar. And I really like to point out the gross fallacy that the fixed number in a person's bank account is fixed. It's somewhat of a lie, because nobody cares about how many dollars they have. They care about how much they could buy with those dollars. It's the purchasing power. And then I talk about such things as the Chapwood Index. And I say that that bank account, that value that you see, is actually going down continuously. Potentially, not exponentially, but linearly at minimum.
About 12% a year for the last 5 years.
Right.
So now I talk about why would you want your value in that number in your bank account login webpage going down? Why would you want to put that value there if it's constantly going down? And then I try and talk about how to get value out of that and store it. And that's what you want to accumulate. You want to accumulate, not fiat. And that's what I talk about lately.
That's really good.
Real assets.
That's true. Like, I've just recently gone in, and so I sat down, and there was me, and there was my mother, and she's not a technical person, and I went through the whole entire process with her from start to finish. We did KYC at a local exchange, and we bought her first DigiByte. It's super, super eye-opening and really quite interesting to see now that I've been doing this for like 6 odd years now. And it's like both the other guys alluded to, is that it's tough because what draws you into the space is going to be different for each and every person. Do you care about storing your wealth for in the future? Do you care about permissionless monetary system? Do you care about the fact that it can't be like there's nobody else who can print the supply into oblivion, save for a Bitcoin inflation bug, of course. But you know what I mean? Like it's going to be different for each and every single person. And so when you're being asked by somebody, it's usually a lot better if it's somebody that you know. But if it's somebody that you don't know, then it's a complete stranger and you've got yourself a 10-second elevator pitch. If I were to come out and go, this is freedom money, and you're like, well, so what? Like, that's the hard part, is you can very easily miss the mark for people. Or if you say to somebody, you can print this money through your computer at home in a steady and fixed emission schedule, some people will go, cool, I can make my computer make me money. Awesome. But if you then, somebody else is going to be more interested in basically the fact that the Fed can't print and print and print trillions every year. Like Jared said, what was it, 12.5% per annum?
Yeah, on average, that's the true decrease in purchasing power of the dollar across the U.S. since 2015. Just go to the Chapwood Index.
Yeah,
and it varies. They track it city to city. Some cities like New York and Los Angeles are actually higher, whereas some places like in the Midwest are like 9%, but roughly about 12%. So, you know, what I tell people is I'm like, look, if you had $1,000 in your bank that you put in last year, you really only have about $900 in purchasing power, and we're really seeing it. You know, I was looking just for like a home improvement for my family's, you know, my parents' house. A bathtub, just a cheap bathtub, is over $1,000 now. And I remember doing construction with my dad when you know, it was a couple $100 15 years ago. So you see the real cost of real world assets and food and stuff. You know, and that's why DigiByte has a hard capped inflation. So a lot of people don't realize, you know, that Bitcoin and DigiByte are hard capped. There's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. There's only going to be 21 billion DigiByte. That's 1 to 1,000 ratio. You know, and none of us can change that. So it's not like the Federal Reserve that can go out there and basically, you know, like what just happened with the Federal Reserve, or the Fed chairman just saying they can print money to infinity in the Secretary of the Treasury, right, during this coronavirus pandemic. So what is that going to do? They've been killing, you know, it's still hard for me when I talk to my parents And even my grandmother, who's 81, who grew up in that era of work hard, save money. But the reality is, if you save that money in a bank account, it gets destroyed. And that was destroyed in 2008. Now it's getting to the point where if you put it into other financial assets, anything tied to that system, I really, truly believe, we're heading towards a very big black swan event. And this, you're seeing signs and symptoms all around.
I don't mind, though, Caracas, the stock exchange of Venezuela, is probably the best place, the only place to store your wealth without the purchasing power being completely obliterated. So if you look at that stock chart for Caracas, it's in the hundreds of thousands for the index. Absolutely incredible. And this is what Raoul Pal really gets into with his macro history coming from the equities industry. And this is how it's interesting to hear him, because he folds crypto into that. Whereas most of us, we come from the crypto perspective because we're younger, but he's coming from the probably late 70s, 80s of the equities era. So it's very interesting that two perspectives.
Yeah, I just, Jared, talking about your grandmother who's 81, and I just found a bunch of old savings notes that I had. And it was like my grandparents bought them for me when I was, 1 year old through 10 years old. And so now they're 30-year notes, and they're now expiring, and they're, they were $100 note that's worth $300 or whatnot. But it's like, it was just savers, and it was like depression babies and people that were, they knew that a penny today meant, a double the penny in a couple of years. And it's just not the case when the printing is going on, and it's gotten so out of hand, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. And I mean, we can go back and we can talk about some of the history. I like to say the US dollar has completely fundamentally changed the way it worked 5 times in the last 120 years. In 1913, with the establishment of the Federal Reserve, again in 1945, when we went from the Bretton Woods system, or at the Bretton Woods Conference, when the US dollar became the world's reserve currency, but then it was still a gold-backed currency. So savers, it did make sense, right? Mm-hmm. But then in 1971, 1972, because the US was losing so much of its gold that was being redeemed for these dollars, Nixon and Kissinger took us off the gold standard and effectively put us on the petro standard, which that translated into the 80s and 90s. And then you had the emergence of these derivative markets, the financial weapons of mass destruction, which then morphed into causing, the 2006 crisis, with CDOs, et cetera, which basically is when savers were killed. And then now we've been on this infinite money printing spree since 2008. And now it's going full exponential. So, the U.S. government's printed more money since this pandemic started than the first 240 years of the U.S. combined. I mean, my next question was going to be, why do you think cryptocurrency is important? But I think we've already answered that. So it's going to be a side question, which is, I mean, do we see potentially a government, a sovereign nation at some point, whether it's creating their own, whether it's utilizing a public chain that's out there? I mean, do you guys see that happening? And do you think it's potentially a paradigm shift in the space?
Well, 100%.
Well, if they're creating their own, it's going to be bad. There's what's the point?
Already happening.
They're literally just taking their dollar and putting it on a chain and going, look at us.
It's MMT. That's where that comes in.
Yeah, it's already happened. But just to go back one step, so there's 2 elements that I think to get people's attention to really wrap them in. The first one is the financial implications, the market implications, everything we just talked about. The second thing is the absolute security. And this is what has always been my favorite thing that I've talked about for years is, if you imagine basically all the DNA in your body, you have DNA in your hair, you have DNA in your legs, all the DNA, if it was only located in your fingertip and you were, chopping some vegetables and you slipped and you chopped it off, you'd have a serious problem, right? Well, that's how we architect all our data systems and all our financial centers, right? We have all these single points of failures. So with the blockchain, the technology that it's built upon is literally the most advanced leading mathematics and cryptographic innovations since Claude Shannon and information theory in 1945, 1948. So all the innovations, blockchain just didn't pop up out of nowhere. Blockchain is like a car. There's all these subsystems. There's an engine, there's a transmission, there's the gas. Well, that's how a blockchain is, right? You have the P2P networking, you have the transaction validation, you have the private key storage. All these subsystems are individual mathematical advances that are literally considered some of the most brilliant mathematical innovations and cryptography innovations for the last basically 80 years. So all that coming together and how it's intertwined for security and security of mathematical code. So there is no human that's required to be trusted. And that is the real key innovation that applies to not just finance, but data security and privacy. So as we move into the future, money got people's attention, but our securing our own private data and information to take it away from these big tech companies that want to censor us, that want to control us, and all the stuff that you're seeing now come in full swing. This is the other part of it that isn't really being talked about, but that's the next wave that is going to get people's attention.
And how do we get those people's attention? Right?
We just start demonstrating.
Like we're talking here, we know, right? Like I think all of us, it's like, do you guys think it's going to have to be some sort of acute event that happens where people finally, I know more people today, like I've had more people reaching out recently that are asking more financial questions. They're things like reserve requirements, right? People don't realize that the banks don't have the money, right? And now regulation that came in, it's down to zero, right? Yeah. Tether has more money on hand.
Want to hear an interesting one that may play out? So China has the digital renminbi. They're full on crypto, where the U.S., nobody knows about it. This is straight up everyday life, probably for a lot of people in China right now. The BSN, the Blockchain Service Network, is China's national blockchain infrastructure initiative. So this is an integral part of the political system in China right now. In the United States, nobody knows about crypto. It's, the small percentage of us that know about crypto. But there's one person that has the potential to make a big difference. Brian Brooks at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is the person and the office that handles banking and the rules and regulations related to banking. So this is where I'm heading with this. The solution to the world global reserve is probably a basket of currencies. Is any sovereign country likely to give up control over their sovereign currency? I doubt it. So I lean heavily towards CBDCs. They're going to push them because that'll allow them to do MMT.
Well, and also, yeah, absolutely. And also, just as a note, I don't know if a lot of people saw this, but when I was in DC in January, I went around to the Congressional Blockchain Caucus and told them all personally, thank you. But yesterday, Representative Darren Soto, I believe he's from Central Florida, tweeted out the Digital Taxonomy Act and Blockchain Innovation Act just passed out of the Energy Commerce as amendments, including Consumer Safety Technology Act. Blockchain technology is transformational. So I think after this election cycle's over, I think you're going to see a big push by the United States because they realize they're falling behind the game, especially when it comes to China. So it is looking promising from what's happening. So hats off and thank you to Representative Soto.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And you've got entrepreneurs in the U.S. that are looking elsewhere. And, the U.S. has traditionally been kind of this innovation center where a melding pot of different cultures and people come together, and that's where interesting ideas come from. And when you create they don't realize that they're in a competitive landscape with other countries, and it is so simple to move and start something, and these other countries are dying to get smart entrepreneurs on board, is that they're falling behind every second, and they're losing smart, intelligent, hardworking people that otherwise would probably build in an area that has a low tax rate. But especially if you live, somewhere like a California, it's very difficult here to build a company and to get advantages.
That's why all the blockchain entrepreneurs are moving to Texas. Like it's crazy how many people you see coming there. But as somebody who witnessed and experienced this firsthand, I was trying to bring this up in 2014, 2015. But the problem is everybody saw it as just financial. And so there was this overwhelming thought that it needed to be, just financial regulators, when in reality, the underlying technology was not well understood, especially from the cybersecurity aspect or the data privacy aspects. But that's changing. And so I think that there's a consensus now, it seems, in government and as well across the industry that blockchain technology is going to impact every industry, not just financial technology. But obviously, money got people's attention.
That's a really good point, though. Money is very much what got people And it's what got me interested. I heard that I could print money with my graphics card, and I was like, cool, let's find out about it. And it's the hook, right?
Yeah.
Like people, it sounds really pessimistic, but people are naturally greedy. And I was greedy. I wanted to find out more about how can I print money from my computer and make it work for me. Now that I'm here, you're exactly right. And the data security aspect and all of the other really cool, juicy stuff is what's kept me here. But money was the hook. Money was what got me interested. Money was what got me excited to begin with. And like, to be honest, now I don't really care about that very much at all. It is all the other really cool stuff.
Fundamentals.
It's funny. I just got done watching The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend it. And it's all about, you know, a small group of individuals in California making global decisions for everyone in the world on every single app that they use on their smartphones and addicting them.
Wait, this is a show or this is real life?
It's both. It's both.
Real life.
Gray area.
but it's interesting because, you know, we've become the product, and our data.
It's free. You're the product.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's become this thing where there's an army of people really against us trying to addict us at all times. There's patterns that are you know, there's a reason why every time you walk down the street, people are, you know, we're turning into Tyrannosaurus Rex, basically shorter arms and a neck that goes like this. And, you know, it's interesting when you think about blockchain from that perspective as a solution for gaining our sanity and control back versus just money. So I find it, you know, what's your perspective on that with crypto's place beyond money, I guess?
That's the fundamentals. So this whole DeFi craze has been hot, and you guys mentioned the critical event, and that'll probably take up a good portion. I don't want to digress too much, but what you are hitting on is one of the most important means of evaluating not just DigiByte, all of these assets, the fundamentals. And that's where the old financial folks come up short with regard to the crypto space. There are fundamentals, and strong fundamentals, that are indicative of the longevity, the entrenchment, and the inevitability for these crypto assets to be consumed. And DigiByte has some of the strongest fundamentals in the entire crypto space. Happy to talk about it, but I'm just saying there's a lot of assets out there that have incredible fundamentals. And one interesting thing is that that's a big part of what I talk about with regard to portfolio balance and position sizing and time horizons of when assets are going to gain attention, because different fundamentals warrant different attention.
So I've been reading the book Fake by Robert Kiyosaki, which he's been one of my individuals I've looked up to since I was the first time I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know, I think when I was in college. And he said it best. He's like, the reason I trust, you know, blockchain is, he's like, I don't have to trust a human being. I don't have to trust the government. I don't have to trust individuals. He's like, I don't know what exact format it's going to look like, but blockchain is going to change the world and it is going to disrupt things. And if you haven't checked out his book, Fake, it's an amazing book that I think sums up everything we're talking about really, really well. But obviously, you know, I'm very biased towards DigiByte. So I do believe we are set up as good, or if not better, than anyone else out there. And that's really what I think, you know, like why we're doing this kind of thing, education, helping people understand, you know, what this is all about. Because I believe that is the one issue we have. To answer your previous question is how do we raise awareness? It's education. You know, it's explaining to people, you know, why they should care, and then, you know, what they should care about, and then how this fixes it. And, you know, and there's a lot of confusion in this space. I mean, there's a spectrum. Decentralization is a spectrum. You know, there's absolutely hardcore pure decentralization, which I believe DigiByte is, all the way to, you know, there's a lot of charlatans masquerading as being decentralized. I'm not here to knock other projects, but there's a lot of riffraff out there. And there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And that's held us back, you know, on several occasions.
Minimized.
So talk a little bit about, like, obviously you said you guys have been working on DigiByte for a while and you're biased towards it. Yes. And that's great. Tell us a little bit about why, what are some of the key fundamental differences? So people know, I mean, we read, you know, the white paper and everything else, and the, you know, the different algorithms for mining and why proof of work, you know, matters, right? And why that's a big piece.
First of all, most importantly, DigiByte's its own independent protocol and network. And that's very important because we don't rely on anyone else. So, you know, the crazy thing about this recent DeFi implosion, right? Or like the sushi situation, right? Here we had a highly centralized project being launched on a highly centralized system, on a system that basically started out and was originally basically almost 100% pre-mined, right? So there's been a lot of heavy centralization on this stack. So this emerging DeFi stack is almost like the derivatives stack that we saw and are seeing, you know, in the traditional financial system. So you've got to be wary of that, because if one of those underlying levels and layers goes out, it causes issues for the entire thing. So in my book, I talked about, and this was in relation to the internet, but if you imagine a bridge, right? Well, if there's a bridge that was built in the 1800s on some quicksand with some, you know, shaky timber beams, that, you know, over the years got updated, they slapped some sheet metal on it, they painted it, they made it look good. Well, that's kind of what's happening on some of these highly centralized platforms, when in reality, that underlying rotting core timber that holds the whole thing up isn't as strong as it could be. Now with DigiByte, that thing is like reinforced concrete, like settled, like, you know, hundreds of feet into the ground. And it's a very, very sturdy base. Now on the flip side, we haven't built that those high, you know, top layers to the same level yet, but we're getting there and we're going to get there. So it literally comes down to foundations. You know, once you have that decentralized protocol, that highly robust network, that is highly decentralized, you can do much, much, much more with it much longer into the future, and it's much more reliable. So that really is what DigiByte has been engineered to be over the last, you know, 7-8 years.
And when you say there's perpetuity,
real talk,
yeah. Go ahead, John.
Well, when you say those upper levels, what specifically are you referring to? Are you referring to like the UX presentation layer? Are there certain functions that need to be built out?
Yeah, for instance, I mean, Solidity is a programming language, made it super easy for almost anybody to go in there, start writing smart contracts. Yeah, the UI interface. But, you know, a lot of people don't realize when Ethereum hit its heyday, what is it? Infura was like 95% of all transactions were being routed through one server. That's not decentralization.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And that's what I was talking about. You got to picture that underlying base. So what we're trying to do is allow the same thing to happen, but in a truly decentralized fashion.
So
So just to give some of the viewers like a bit of an overview here, I get fascinated by the stats for the blockchain. And so this is one of the things that I've done as part of that community education. So to give you an idea, where were we? So this was in July. It's a couple of months old now, but it's relative enough. It's recent enough. On Bitcoin, over a 16-hour period, there were 24 unique miners, which that's not bad, right? That 24 over 16 hours. You'd go, yeah, okay. You look at Litecoin as well. There was 12 unique miners, so half as many as Bitcoin. If you look at DigiByte, over that same 16-hour period, we had 142 unique miners throughout that time period. Like that's 10 times what the others are doing. Like that's what, when we're talking about that kind of secure and rock solid foundation, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that kind of thing.
Something very interesting to point out. What you just hit on, Joe, and to everyone, is not the topic of conversation going on in the crypto space right now. And I mean that from a very interesting standpoint, because right now you got all these new people coming in, and there is nobody that knows anything about what you just said, about mining, about proof of work. All they know is that 4-letter acronym DeFi, and they're sucked into 1,000% APY. And this comes back maybe to that original question: how do we communicate what the significance is of the assets that we're involved with? And what the group of assets that DigiByte falls into is called a UTXO asset. It's the fundamental protocol that was created with Bitcoin. And
people care about number go up, right? Like, doesn't matter what the number is, as long as it's your mining, as long as it's your bank balance, as long as it's the hash rate. Number go up. Number go up is a good thing. And so that's why you'll see a lot of people, especially like in the Bitcoin space. Yeah, it's great. Our hash rate's gone through the roof. Look at it. It's sky high. Yeah, that's cool. But you've only got 24 miners. And over that same period, DigiByte had well over 5 times that many. Like, you know, like that's the kind of...
Well, we need
Yeah,
to
well,
tell the story. We need to tell the story of how DigiByte.
Yeah, we need DeFi to suck them in and get them interested and get people curious
Well,
with
not
money.
necessarily. I don't necessarily think it's even related to DeFi. These are all mutually exclusive components. I like to think, as I've said many times, DigiByte is for record storage and asset management, and that we already have it. We have the proof of concept with DigiAssets. It's fully functional. We need to decentralize that implementation and have it incentivized so a person has an incentive to spin up a DigiAsset API and participate in a decentralized network of asset API servers. And that way, any company could launch an asset, and they could and the metadata is available for John from Idaho can spin up an asset API server and get 0.0001 DGB per asset API query. So there's their incentive, and that alone, a company. Here's an interesting one, and this is what I talk about DigiByte's long-term future. Everything that's been done thus far, I truly see as proof of concept, because you think a company comes in with $1 billion project and they have because they want to save hundreds of millions. That's going to render everything that has been done as deprecated. They're going to build a ridiculous QT wallet, all these websites. And guess what? Here's the interesting one. They are going to have to secure the network. So they're going to become a dominant miner. And then guess what? When they show in their balance sheet and the news reports on the stock market say they're saving hundreds of millions of dollars, that's when the FOMO kicks in for the other companies. And that's exactly what's playing out with the automotive industry, how much money these companies are going to save with electric vehicles. They're saving hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 20 years in manufacturing costs. And that's the same thing that'll happen with stuff like DigiByte. Instead of using cloud service providers like AWS, you save hundreds of millions of dollars. And then the next company comes in, sets up the proof of work mining, and now it becomes a competition to secure the network. And what's interesting, though, I'll end this monologue on this note, is the general public could participate in the mining process, which means there's a communal component to securing the network. So that's a social component. That means we're all collectively working together. So in so many regards, I would say it's a humanitarian component where companies and individual people have a capacity to operate on a level playing field, where people could compete with companies.
Just great. A side note to that, I mean, I started work on a project in 2015 for document management for international trade, shipping, and logistics. We executed and implemented that starting in 2016, 2017. And even in 2017 was already helping secure hundreds of millions of dollars in goods going back and forth between Southeast Asian countries and the United States. Now, at the time, I was under a 2-year NDA, but that was just a private company leveraging that foundation to basically build on top of it. Any company could do that, and anybody could do that. And so what we're trying to do is build out tools to make that easier and to get that education across to people. So, it's not just one particular thing, but anybody and any company can anchor into that foundation and use the DigiByte UTXO blockchain to build all sorts of amazing stuff. I mean, I've had all sorts of conversations, fascinating about different applications. And that's what I love about one of our applications, DigiID, replacing passwords. We use that with a document management system. I've used that with a Raspberry Pi to control locks on my door to mess around with. I'm actually building a drone that I can actually use the private keys to encrypt the communications from the home base to the software and actually give it commands via the blockchain. So, there's this really cool thing where you can lock up stuff with time lock. So for like rentals, for like short-term rentals, for like Airbnb, stuff like that, or even cars, right? You can actually use those private keys to unlock it and then handle the payment. So the really cool thing about, DigiByte is it can not only handle the payments layer, and that's where we have stuff that we're working on like DigiAssets, as well as we're talking about the DigiDollar, which will allow people to basically lock up their DigiByte. But it's very complicated. I don't want to get too much into that because I know it'll be a bunch of questions. But there's a lot you can do, because not only do you have the payments rail and layer, but you have the security and communications. And that's when I break DigiByte down for people, there's 3 layers. You have at the very core, it's a communications protocol. That's what a blockchain is. And so you can communicate and send all sorts of data. Now, how do you incentivize people like Noah was getting at? Well, that's where the mining part comes in, or like what he's talking about, which we're working on with Digi Assets. And that's the incentive layer. That's where DigiByte as a digital asset comes in. And then finally, that top layer is the asset or the applications layer, where you can build these, fancy UI interfaces that can make this streamlined and easier for various applications. So literally the sky is limitless for what you can build, on top of that final top layer, because like I said, at its core, it's a communications layer. And because we've had, I don't know how many nodes at this point, I think it's been over 300,000 full nodes installed. That doesn't mean they're active, but installed over the last 2-3 years. That means every one of those computers has a full copy of the DigiByte blockchain somewhere in the world. And when you look and when you look at like some of these other projects that have 21 servers and that's it. Yeah. And then you compare it to the true decentralization. That's why I was talking about that foundation. It's all about the foundation to build well into the future.
So those nodes, that Joe, what's that called? RAID 1? Is that a mirror copy and the geographical distribution for those nodes around the world? Hey, Amazon, what do you think? You think you're going to spin up 5, 10, and imagine the incentives start picking up, and you got 100,000 nodes around the world? There's no centralized organization that could compete with that. It's all about incentive, and there needs to be a region, and that's why this DeFi thing is so hot, because there's yield and incentive, and the problem is it's perverted a little bit because of the easy money. But that's something I talked about with a lot of folks in the for the DigiByte Foundation, a lot of our channels. I really think a great expenditure of effort would literally be writing business plans and showing companies the amount, true business plans, like financial projections with estimates and how much they're spending with Amazon right now and how much they would have to spend to convert to a DigiByte implementation. We're talking about literally proof of work, mining hardware to secure their implementation and spinning up higher level web DApp user interfaces to interact with these systems, and no doubt incentivizing the general public to participate in the security. They literally but I think after all of that, after a real business plan, I think there's still the incredible incentive for these companies to execute on these business plans. And the interesting thing is, I think there's a huge amount of business plans that could be written nonstop. And the Anthem ID really is a massive example of true potential.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about DigiID just because as going through that, I think that's just a huge problem that needed to be solved as far as identity and passwords and logins. And I can't even tell you how many I have and how many friends that I have that get into the space that have problems and lose passwords, and not to mention passing on. We talked to a really cool project, Safe Haven, where they're working on passing on their assets to next generations and how this is solving those problems. But it's people have Excel spreadsheets of bank accounts that have X amount in there, and it's on a MacBook that's not secured, and they leave it on a plane for an hour and it's gone. And it's, so there's a lot there I want to talk about, but I did start bringing it towards the community a little bit. We talk about incentivization and we talk about getting people to build or companies to build, with DigiByte. I mean, you guys, no pre-mine, there's a pure community. You guys have a great community. How do people get excited? I mean, we talked to another blockchain company the other day, and they've got a foundation, and the foundation's giving them grants, and they're doing all these other things. I mean, how are you guys, helping to participate in that and helping to kind of shepherd the new folks that are coming in?
Well, going back to the very beginning, when we first put DigiByte out, I chose the headline from that day, USA Today, Target 110 million customers' data stolen. I thought that was very fitting because to me, blockchain was about cybersecurity. And going back to, like I said before, a blockchain has all these subcomponents, but it's the innovative way that these different forms of cryptography, whether it's ECDSA, SHA, all these different forms of crypto, the way they intertwine and interact is what makes them useful. And that's what the DigiID is. It's leveraging those private keys. And that's why I always tell people there are ways to scale a blockchain technology infinitely that has nothing to do with block size, because you're utilizing other parts of the UTXO blockchain set, right? So, that's kind of touch on that. Now, as far as incentivizing and motivating people, this has been an interesting lesson, I think, in human psychology that we've experienced since the beginning. So there were times where I was going out trying to raise traditional VC funding, did not work at all very well, because they're like, where's the company? What's it doing? It's a decentralized thing. And explaining that to people in 2013, 2014 was just a nightmare.
Oh, man. I don't even want to know what that VC tour was like. It was probably an absolute nightmare.
Right. Yeah. So then, I came up with the idea, hey, I need to build a specific use case with a private company that leverages DigiByte, and I'll use some of the funds to help keep it going. And that's, where I built the document management record system and a few other applications. Well, the problem there is then you have employees and they're like, why are we working on this open source decentralized thing? Right. And so then, you got a little bit of money, and then you put up some funds, but then you kind of get taken advantage of by some people that just kind of milk it for the money. And once the money is gone, they're out. Right. And then we came along, I think it was in 2017, the first time we decided we were going to try and raise funds for a foundation and launch it, et cetera. Then you decide who's a part of it, et cetera. And it ended up being a disaster back then. So what we actually kind of found is, sure, if we put up specific bounties for specific things, you bring in people that are already passionate and understand the project. So you don't have to teach them. You don't have to do everything. But what's unique, I truly believe, about the DigiByte community is most of the people that I've come across who are some of the most like intellectually, stimulating, smart people I've ever met on the planet are not in DigiByte, to make money or to get paid or to get a day job. Although I think a lot of us would like to have like some sort of consistent salary if we could at some point. But it's in what the but it's what the technology can do for humanity and being a part of that cutting edge of innovation, because there has been stuff we did years ahead of time. If had we done another time, I think we would have had a lot more traction and success, but then other people pick up the ball and run with it. So, being part of that trailblazing spirit and innovation, and knowing that there is no one central person that controls it. I mean, I, as the founder, literally have a fraction of 1% of DGB. And in fact, I personally have gone broke a couple times over the last 6-7 years trying to keep things alive. So it's not like I'm sitting on a massive nest egg, nor is anybody else that I know of that had any sort of unfair advantage, right? It's literally a truly grassroots decentralized community. And I think that appeals to a lot of people, knowing that there is no one central person that's in charge or control or and that's the beautiful thing about it.
Yeah, and I think it's standing the test of time. And, when you look at the DeFi community today and, you see what just happened with a couple of these projects, and someone picked up the money and ran, right? And I think it's like, I don't know how many times that we have to learn that lesson as humans, but it's maybe like Josiah, you're saying, like maybe it's just the greed side to people that they might never learn that lesson. And there's always new people coming in.
At least once more. We're going to have to learn that lesson at least once more, and that will be the same.
I can count on one hand
time,
the amount of other projects that were as fairly launched and decentralized as DigiByte. And how many projects? There's thousands of projects listed, right, on these ranking websites. And that's one of the biggest problems in crypto right now are these ranking websites and how they portray. That is the first window into the industry that people see. Which is why I've actually been working on something to help fight that, but I'm not going to go into details, but that is the project that I have been working on.
Very cool.
The general public doesn't digest that though. And that's the hard part of communicating. They don't appreciate what it means to be trustless. And they are easily swayed by trust minimized. And there's nothing wrong inherently with trust minimized. I would argue very much so, that just requires due diligence, much as the same thing we do with companies in the real world. And so I see a lot of crypto projects from a perspective of a company, and that's really the way I like to digest them. Purpose, utility, and how they fit into the big picture. And that's what overwhelmingly fascinates me about DigiByte. And that's the starting point of a lot of my monologues on my stream. How I get into DigiByte and where it fits in to the big picture.
Well, and speaking of that, if we can flip the tables just a little bit and talk about LunarCRUSH, I remember the first time I saw one of your guys' tweets, and I can't remember if you tagged me or DigiByte, but I was kind of blown away. I was like, wow, this is interesting. And then I started thinking about it because I'm always, I'm a tech nerd, right? So I'm always into data and analytics. And I've often thought there are thousands of things that we don't know about the DigiByte blockchain that I wish we knew if we had more time to put together different analysis and analytics and stuff. And so when I saw what you guys were doing, I was pretty impressed. So if I can ask you a question, you guys have been around since what, 2018?
Yeah.
2018. What prompted you to start LunarCRUSH? And then what are the biggest insights and takeaways that you've seen from the crypto space since you started?
John, you start that one.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to 2013 when I was investing in Bitcoin. And what do you do when you first get into the space? You start to try and find like-minded individuals, right? And you're finding those individuals on Twitter, on Reddit, forums, message boards, all this stuff. And you sort of feel at some point like you're getting an idea of what's going on. At least you think you do, right? And you think you do because you're following some people that you found. Well, it just so happens that those people that you found, the people you're following is a tiny, tiny fraction of who's out there. It led us to find Ethereum and Litecoin and DigiByte, by the way, and all these other projects. But we never really got a full picture of what was going on. And so, Joe and I, we got together and we were like, hey, you know what? We were working at a big ad agency, really, I'd say mentally full-time in crypto and working in automotive, kind of fun stuff. And, and starting to go, hey, what could we capture all this social activity going on? And if so, how can we do it? And we brought in two of our other friends. They're just phenomenal developers. And there's four of us that were all business partners in this, that are part of the core team. And then we have other individuals working with us as well. But, we said, can we capture this information? And so we started with Twitter, then we added Reddit, then we added Medium, then we added YouTube, and then we tried to capture news. And we said, you know what, we did about 4 or 5 different kind of ideas on how we can capture the most news. And at this point, we have probably the most news collected, period, in crypto. We have it from thousands of news sites because of how we go about doing it. And so we started building this out because our own frustration, really, and sometimes getting burned. I'll give you an example. Investing in the DAO.
Yeah.
Remember the DAO on Ethereum? It was going to be the future, right? Before it was hacked. And things like that. Where'd you find it? On Twitter by all these people that were super bullish.
And a lot of times those people are being paid influencers. A lot of people don't realize. Right. I mean, Twitter's kind of cracked down on the bots, as I'm sure you guys are aware of, but it's still out there. I've had in private conversations, people explain what they do when they want to go pump something, paying YouTubers or Twitter followers and stuff. And it's sketchy, but that's why I think what you guys are doing and capturing that data is truly fascinating and amazing.
What you just said is a really good point, because there's a lot of coins that we see that have these spikes. They have these spikes in like one day, all of a sudden, yesterday there was 400 people, unique individuals talking about a coin. And today there's 11,000. And then the next day it's back to 300. Now, what just happened? Right. We see that a lot. And so the very idea that you can hire a few influencers, run a quote campaign, and then that campaign has an end date if you don't have infinite funds to pay these individuals, and they're only posting because you're paying them. What we find is that the communities that are the strongest, you end up seeing this kind of consistent growth over time. And there's a few projects that we definitely see it. DigiByte's one of them. We tend to continue to see that growth. And when we post something, the community kind of goes nuts with memes, with GIFs. We've got Josiah creating videos on YouTube that we saw in February. That was awesome. But we definitely see a lot of engagement from your community. So I think it's interesting to hear you guys talk about decentralization and individuals not being paid, and to see the community take hold and watch that organically grow from a community side, not just a technology side. It translates right over to the community.
It is amazing. I mean, it amazes me, being there since the beginning. And I can tell you, since the beginning, I cannot count the amount of people that have hit me up in private messages and forums offering social media influencers or advertising packages or fake followers or fake trading activity, just all this stuff, literally since 2014. Back then it was all on Bitcoin Talk, then it was kind of on Telegram for a while, and then it's now on Twitter. So all these other projects, like you said, one day 300 followers tweeting about it, the next day 11,000. There's a lot of this, fraudulent activity. It's probably the majority of it, unfortunately. So people need to be aware, and that's what I think what you guys are doing, just being able to state that and recognize that, that's huge, for helping to educate the community. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure,
of course,
appreciate that.
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead.
There's one more thing for you guys to look out for.
Go ahead, Noah.
Because of Uniswap and the AMMs, where there's no listing requirements, it's just point and click, throw a contract address, and I could literally launch an ICO in probably about 35 minutes. There is the unpaid influencers. You don't even need to pay these people anymore to shill a coin, because they're going to shill it because so that's just, you don't even need to pay them anymore. So that the evolution of the ICO is quite fascinating.
Yeah, and it comes down to all Ponzi schemes will come to an end, right? Whether it's a social Ponzi scheme or a financial one, whether it's a financial advisor that's getting other people to put money in, or potentially even the U.S. government printing, right? And it's, from a social perspective, it was something that we wanted to understand was, you can't fake social volume, like over 6 months, over a year, right? We wanted to know transparently who has a community and who doesn't, because the community denotes value in our space, because that's what matters, is the people behind the projects and the people that are fired up about it. And so that's really what we wanted to figure out and wanted to understand. And I think the crypto community in a whole is passionate about their projects, and they're tribal. And I think that's a good thing. I think competition in the space is really good. And I think it pushes us all to iterate and to be better. And it's like, Jared, you were saying at the beginning, you saw something wrong and you wanted to be better at it. And so you created something different. And it's like, when we talk, there's a lot of people who are Bitcoin maximalists, right? And they're like, this one thing is like the best thing, and there's nothing else that could be better. And that actually goes against, I think, the overall goal of what even Bitcoin was there for, was innovation, right? And so, people just need to keep innovating and keep pushing out there. So appreciate that. And thank you guys for the kind words.
I want to make the point of, like, when someone goes on Twitter, for example, and you're seeing what's in front of you, you're only seeing your following and kind of a couple degrees separated for just right now. And you're randomly going on at random times throughout the day, probably not even the same time. And you're getting a very short-term view. So if you just kind of take that comparison to what we're doing, which is we're capturing absolutely everything that we can that's possible off of all these different social sites, that is not just right now, it's all of it over time. And so if you think of that as kind of a base, and then we go very deep. And so if you think of us going very deep, what I mean by that is every single post that comes in, we built an NLP library. We use machine learning to very narrowly classify these posts, and it gets smarter, and it learns and it learns, and it's getting better, from very bullish to very bearish, as well as spam. And so, in fact, we even have funds that have used our spam data to trade off of spam. So it's pretty fun stuff. But like we take
unpaid shills.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good point. Why is spam up right now versus another time? What's going on? Why is someone incentivized to spam the heck out of a coin? What's going on? So there is some truth to it for sure. But we then also look at things like social engagement, which is like, great that there's 1,000 posts, but no one's commenting, no one's retweeting. So we measure all of those engagements. I mean, if I look at DigiByte over the last year here, there's been almost 1.4 with a B billion engagements off of
That's crazy.
Off of about 1.26 million posts. So there's a lot of engagement going on. There's a lot of community going on, and it's consistent. It's not like a one-day spike, and it's growing. And so when we look at all of that, who's doing all this stuff? It's individuals. And so we look at all those individuals, and we say, great that there's a million posts, but how many people posted? So we track all that. And then we also tell you over time who were the most influential individuals based upon activity, engagement, and their growth of their following. And we also have an influencers tool. So, for example, DigiByte's your number one influencer over the last year. We got Jared coming in a close second.
I'm going to add it to the stream real quick so everyone can see what you're looking at.
Cool. Yeah, but DigiByte's number one. So, Jared, I'm sorry you did not beat DigiByte, but you were very close. You're very close. We got Tommy Mustache.
And by the way, just so people know, there's multiple people that manage that DigiByte account. I think there's like 6 people that actually have access to it. So it's not just like a single person.
So how does that work? How do you deal with 6 people?
We don't want to go into OPSEC on a private live stream or a live stream here, but
sure.
But we manage it. It's possible.
Yeah, it's great. You guys are doing good. So is the DigiByte awareness team too. They always seem out there. Pretty great stuff. But we rank influencers over time. So like, for example, over the last week, it's going to be different than the last year. Because you might post one day, a few times a day, and then all of a sudden you vanish. And so yet everyone else is consistently posting over time. We saw the master of leadership, Amore Love Amore, this morning. He actually did a video live stream, even talking about that we were all going to be talking today. It was pretty cool, actually. And we got Noah posting quite a bit. He's the 4th most influential here over the last week. So yeah, we track all that stuff. And as you can see, just back to, I'm going to show social volume over time here. And yeah, there's our almost 1.26 million posts over the last year, which if we compare it to the year before, it's up 305%.
Yeah, it's amazing. For me, this is just extremely satisfying because, over the last, 6-7 years, DigiByte's literally been one of the only probably half dozen projects that have consistently been in the other ranking, the market cap ranking. And I tell people we've been here for the long term, but seeing this kind of data and engagement, we can talk about nodes and all that stuff, but that kind of goes over a lot of people's heads. But seeing this kind of information to me is absolutely fascinating. And it proves, hey, there really is a community there. And what's even more amazing to me is if you go to the main ranking, I think we're like number 6 right now, but if you go over to Coin Market Cap, we're number 50 according to market cap. It just goes to show you, like what I wrote about in my book, where I called it the market cap fallacy. These artificially inflated market caps that aren't real. They're highly centralized projects with just a handful of insiders. And you see that in the social media data, which is absolutely fascinating.
You bring up a point that I think we've talked about a million times internally. It's like, what exactly are we doing? We kind of look at it as we're tracking what everyone should have been focused on all along. Everyone's been staring at market cap and price and drawing lines on charts, and it's great because there are elements to it that make sense. But what I've got up right here, we have a correlation rank, and that tells you how correlated is social to price at any given time. And we scored on a 1 to 5 basis. I mean, there are times on here that it doesn't hit 5 very often, which would mean an absolutely perfect correlation. But when you look at it over time here, it's more correlated than not. Like right now, it's over the last day, 3.6 out of 5, meaning the social activity as price moves, it's kind of working in tandem. It's definitely correlated, more than not. And when we look at, our alt rank, in fact, I'm going to bring this down to a shorter term. We look at this and say, well, what if we took social activity and market activity and price performance relative to Bitcoin, and we ranked it. And so when we look at that, even over the last day here, it looks like we're moving down. So we're moving from 156 down to number 19 right now. And so that's positive. And a lot of times what we end up seeing is the beautiful thing about this is we see that social activity tends to sometimes move way ahead of price by hours or even days. And when you start to see this over time, maybe not at one moment, but if you see this over time, you start to say, wow, maybe there's something that's going to happen here. And, I'll say this was moving when you guys had this huge move earlier this year. When I look way back, I want to look at the volume here. When we go back into this range here, when price was way lower, alt rank was going off. And we were able to see this ride all the way from here, all the way to here. We saw it again here and all the way to the top. So, social really was moving before your price was. And we tend to see this a lot. So, an imperfect science, but definitely correlated.
Fascinating.
I feel like we need Noah next time he's doing some charting to include social and have like kind of a like overlay one on top of the other, plot the differences in times as well, and give us some insights there, man.
That's the thing. I do a lot of technical lately because DeFi is just explosive and it's all short term. The beginning of the year, I was much more macro, thinking more macro, and trying to tell myself these stories about the picture and how these projects fit into the big picture. So Joe, yes, I'll update my TA, but I'm going to try and push my stream back towards more storytelling, and that's kind of. I would hope that actually conveys what we mentioned. How do we talk to people? How do we get through to people? And it's not going to be through charts. And I really don't think it's healthy to get through to people with oh, it's going to go up. Oh, I think the chart looks good. You're going to make money. I'd rather talk about the story. What is the significance of these projects with regard to the financial system, with regard to the economy and banks and grandpa's savings account and stuff like that.
And I think you're right. Like that story, the whole complete package, not just from the very start, but all the way even to where we are today. That story and the trajectory that it conveys for DigiByte is fantastic. It's such a good story.
Guess what story's coming up? So DeFi, there will be a point where it's risk off. So there's very common terminology, risk on, risk off in the financial system. So there'll be a point where everyone's like, oh, no, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Now, the UTXO assets, basically what we saw in 2016, 2017, they haven't done anything. Stuff like BlockNet, Syscoin did pump a bit, StakeNet, Bitcoin. Bitcoin hasn't budged, relatively speaking. We haven't seen the run. So what happens when all this crazy Ethereum, ERC20, DeFi insanity turns risk off? Where's that value flow? We're going to see some serious action in the UTO asset space. DigiByte's going to see its day, and it's going to be sooner than later.
That's
when
interesting
it happens
because
quick.
it's kind of like, okay, well, if you sell that, where is it going? You're right, because it's either exiting the market entirely, which I'm gonna go out on a limb and highly doubt that. This money's staying in the market. People aren't going back into US dollars after being in crypto for years. And where does it go? So it's a great point.
No, very cool. Well, guys, I really appreciate y'all coming on here, having a chat with us. I think we're gonna have to do it again here very soon. I really want to hear, a little bit more about, just maybe give us just a brief, like what's coming up in the future here. What's the vision of what you're kind of focused on, whether it's personally, professionally with DigiByte, where do you want to see the market go, and what are you passionate about, and what can the community, do to get involved in some of that stuff?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're going to keep being consistent like we have over the past 7 years, which by consistent, I mean, we're working on the next version of DigiByte, version 8.19.0, which will effectively be the eighth, I guess, completely different version of DigiByte, if you will. But, with and there's been a lot of minor updates over the years. We've done dozens of releases, I think, at this point. I can't even remember. And with that, some of them, there's thousands of lines of code that get changed. So we're enhancing and reinforcing that foundation and that base to make it even stronger. And that's the continuing to build out Digi assets, to build out use cases, and to help, raise awareness and grow the community, and to be consistent. We're at a point now, you guys will have to help me out. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we're over the halfway point when it comes to DigiByte mining. We're at about 2/3, right? Is that right? So, the 21 billion DigiByte will be mined in 21 years. So the year 2035, the last DigiByte will be mined. So they're only getting scarcer. They're only getting harder to come by.
Yeah, we're at 13.5 billion now out of the 21 billion.
13.5. Yeah. So almost 2/3. So, you know, that it's the reduction is 1% a month. So there's no halving event with DigiByte. And we did that for hopefully to make a better, you know, more stable price stability. But, you know, that's hard to determine.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I personally am very super fascinated by what you gentlemen are doing because, like I said, I think one of the biggest problems in the market right now is how the entire space is being presented to newcomers. And I learned after, you know, spending 15 months writing my book, Blockchain 2035, that there needed to be a better way to evaluate projects and to evaluate where people go. And that's why, you know, like I said, I'm super excited about what you guys are doing. We'll have to talk some more because I'm actually working on something that I think you guys might actually find very fascinating. But, you know, I feel personally the biggest problem right now in this space is education, awareness, and understanding. And so that's where I'm focusing to spend my time and energy to help it, because the tech's there, you know, the stack's there. I mean, we can always do better, but the underlying blockchain is, you know, it's functioning good.
One of the things that I'm very excited about, and I'm always happy to talk about it. One, the education you're talking about, Jared, that's what I try and do every day. I'm trying to save people from doing things because they don't understand what they're doing. They got to understand it. They got to protect those gains. Yeah, have good for portfolio balance. But here's one of the more interesting long-term, midterm, long-term tech macro narratives about DigiByte, and then that'll be my last spiel. It's the
spiel away.
So the REN is obviously an ERC20 tokenized representation on the Ethereum, but it's not just Ethereum blockchain. We're talking Polkadot, we're talking Cosmos, it's going to be on everything. It's going to be Elrond, and a lot of Elrond has its bridge and Energy Web chain. A bunch of these assets are building bridges where they have they maintain quantity of assets cross chain. So a fascinating thing is maintaining Digi asset metadata continuity cross chain, because now you have the same unchanged quantity of a Digi asset. However, it was created either fungible or non-fungible, or even just a DigiByte, not a Digi asset, but maintaining that cross chain and having those assets participate in Turing complete smart contracts. I don't give a crap, pardon the language, what platform it's on. Polkadot, Cosmos, Ethereum, Elrond, Tezos, list goes on and on. But that Turing complete contracts with Digi asset and the associated metadata, maintaining cross-chain quantities, that's some serious big picture brain busting stuff right there.
It's huge. Appreciate that.
It's huge. I mean, housing, property taxes, social security, banking records, health records, participating in Turing complete smart contracts, lawyer contracts, and sophisticated escrow deals. And it's you know that, but you need the cross.
Talking about trust there too. I mean, it's just the trustless side of everything that we're doing, and just interoperability of bringing that to everything. That's it.
You need the trustless, but we're also going to have to live with trust minimized, because right now we have completely trusted in the real world. I'm completely trusting my bank to do this, but we need everything. What we really need is the trustless at the foundation, because you don't even have to question it. It's completely trustless, and that's where you want to store your value, in the trustless, and your information in the trustless. And then, as we say, as investors, a little bit of risk on is where you go for the trust minimized, and they have to evaluate how much risk you're taking and what kind of compensation you're getting for taking that risk.
So I have a question for you. So you know, we've got all these DeFi projects that I like to call some of them CeFi projects because they're centralized finance. I call that a bank. And you know, what are your thoughts on this DeFi space? Should DeFi be more built on DigiByte since it's more trustless and decentralized?
Well, I don't think it can because it's UTXO, which is a scripting language, so it's not necessarily doesn't have the Turing completeness. So that would be.
So this is where I'm going to interject. It can, and we wanted to, but there's things we have to do to make it easier for that to happen today. So It technically is possible. A lot of people don't realize that the history of UTXO and Ethereum is actually very similar. And the fact that Ethereum was largely born out of the what they called the Omni layer, which then became colored coins, which basically added more effectively commands to quote unquote make it Turing complete. We can add those same commands into our Digi Assets layer. And one of the things I would like to see done, and actually would like to get some bounties up to help developers work on, is allow basically Solidity Ethereum contracts to run on top of DigiByte in a very similar manner, except they're leveraging the DigiByte base. And I believe that is possible. I believe that is doable. I'm not going to promise anybody a time frame on that, but it is possible. It's just not easy to do right now.
I fully appreciate and understand that. There's a lot of other platforms that are trying the concept. For instance, Elrond is probably one of the more interesting ones that's picking up a little bit of attention. The biggest reason they're picking up attention is not just the concept of offloading Solidity contracts like onto DigiByte, but it's they're focusing heavily on the interoperability, because there's so many billions of dollars right now, and it's not just we want something to be on DigiByte, we want something to be on Cosmos and Polkadot, and it is on Ethereum. That's where it is. So how do we start to migrate it? So we want to attach to it. And that's, to me, the metaphor there is, you got a raging river. You got an $8 billion, $9 billion river. I'm going to throw my raft in it. I'm going to jump in that river. I'm not going to run alongside and be like, I'm going to keep up with you. No, let's get a raft. Let's build a Digi raft. Let's throw it in the Ethereum river.
Digi raft.
And let's do this thing. I'm ready.
You better name your next product Digi Raft for sure.
Digi raft.
Yeah.
The bridge. Bridge, the Digi raft.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, interoperability is the future, but at the end of the day, it goes to that original point. You still have to have those underlying concrete reinforced pillars to build this entire ecosystem that we're all wanting to see happen, this future. And it's not just going to be one blockchain. It's going to be multiple blockchains. But I can tell you there's probably only going to be a handful of those underlying, protocols that it runs on.
Yeah, 110%.
You probably like that. That kind of brings it maybe to like a really good point. That's what I'm most excited about. Like you mentioned with 8.19 is like it sounds boring as hell for most people. Like what I'm excited about is how we can further distribute and ensure a broader distribution of the DigiByte asset with 8.19, which will be home-based mining and things like that with GPUs, with CPUs. Maybe you've got your cell phone, you leave it going overnight, it does a little bit of mining while it's on charging and things like that. So maybe you don't end up with a buttload of DigiByte, but over time it builds up, and we further enhance that spread and that distribution of not just the blockchain, but of the DigiByte asset itself as well. That's what I'm really excited about.
I want to bring up. Imagine you do that, and imagine you have an entire community that feels vested.
Yes,
they have a actual interest in DigiByte, in the future success of it, and they're all becoming a bank, basically a personal bank, and they're all going to
There's no KYC for the stuff that you mine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're getting a return for participating in the security of the network at a social level. I think that is brilliant.
Well, and also more important to touch on this in a technological perspective, what Josiah is saying is very important, because there's really not a lot of focus and attention on making UTXO protocols sexier. I mean, there's, the Bitcoin core devs that are well funded, you've got Blockstream and those guys, obviously they've done a great job over the years. But the reality is it's kind of slowed. There's not, because it's such a big ecosystem, Bitcoin specifically and Ethereum, it's harder and harder and harder to make changes to these systems. But, back in 2014, 2015, you were seeing more people go out and try and improve upon it, because the reality is the UTXO blockchain set and DigiByte stayed pretty close to BTC in a lot of ways for a reason. And that reason is there has literally been hundreds of thousands of people that have put their eyes on that code over the last, 10, 12 years, right? And that's not the case for a lot of these newer systems. So, in a lot of ways, some of these projects that go out and say they're going to rewrite the blockchain from the ground up, well, they're just introducing all sorts of exploits and vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Whereas we're refining and honing in something that's been, under development for quite a long time. And I don't think that's appreciated in the industry, today.
It's horribly underappreciated. This is an iteration. We are iterating, and the software devs, anyone who listens to it from that industry, appreciate that. Always be iterating.
And that's where it's exciting what they're going to do with Taproot and Bitcoin and Schnorr signatures at some point, which we'll do as well, because I think both of those need to happen. So there are technical innovations, and we're working on it, right? So but that tends to be the least sexy part about crypto. But to me, that's always been one of the most exciting things.
Yeah. You gotta have the builders, right? Infrastructure has to be there, has to be ready for when that next generation comes through, and maybe that's what LunarCRUSH can help with, is bring that next generation in.
Absolutely, yeah. What you guys are doing are fantastic. So thank you for taking the initiative and getting out there and doing what you're doing. All
right, guys. Everyone keeps asking in the chat what everyone's Twitter handle is, so just tell us what your Twitter handle is, and then guys, we really appreciate you coming on. This was amazing. I think we could just keep on going. Yeah, just drop it into the chat if you can toss it in there, and we'll memorialize it. We'll send it out after. But Jared, Josiah, Noah, John, you guys rock. Thank you so much. Everyone listening, thank you so much for coming on. This will be a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, you name it, Anchor. It's going to be everywhere. So appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
So much, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.